Part 1. The Unsettling Arrival. Starting a new job can be nerve-wracking, but I was excited for the opportunity. The office was modern, with sleek glass walls and buzzing with the kind of energy that makes you feel alive. Everything seemed perfect, except for one thing: the new intern. Her name was Emily, and she stood out from the moment she walked in. It wasn't just her old-fashioned clothes or the way she seemed to glide rather than walk. There was something off about her, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up whenever she was near. On her first day, I noticed that she didn't seem to interact with anyone. She would just appear at her desk, typing away, never joining us for coffee breaks or lunch. When I finally worked up the courage to introduce myself, she looked right through me, her eyes dark and hollow, as if she were seeing something far beyond the office walls. That night, I couldn't shake the image of her eyes. I tried to tell myself that it was just my imagination, that starting a new job was stressful enough without inventing ghost stories. But then, things started happening that I couldn't explain. It began with the little things. Papers would go missing from my desk, only to reappear in Emily's workspace. I would hear whispering in the empty corridors, and once I found my computer displaying old sepia-toned photographs of people I didn't recognize. The images vanished as soon as I blinked, leaving me questioning my sanity. The final straw came one evening when I was working late. The office was eerily quiet, the only sound the steady hum of the air conditioning. I was engrossed in a report when I felt a chill sweep through the room. I looked up to see Emily standing by the window, staring out into the night. "Emily?" I called out, my voice trembling. She didn't respond, didn't even flinch. I walked over to her, feeling an inexplicable dread. As I got closer, I saw that her reflection in the window didn't match her movements. Her reflection was crying, tears streaming down its face, while the real Emily stood motionless, her face blank and expressionless. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Her head turned slowly towards me, and for the first time she seemed to really see me. Her eyes were filled with sorrow, and she mouthed one word: "Help." Before I could react, the lights flickered and went out. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. But when I looked up, Emily was gone. The room was empty, except for the cold breeze that still lingered in the air. I spent the rest of the night trying to make sense of what had happened. Was Emily a ghost? A figment of my imagination? I didn't know, but I was determined to find out. I had to help her, whatever she was, and I had a feeling that uncovering her story would reveal the dark secrets hidden within our office. Part 2. The Strange Encounters. The following day I arrived at work with a mix of anxiety and determination. I couldn't get Emily's sorrowful plea out of my mind. As I sat at my desk, I scanned the office for any sign of her, but she was nowhere to be seen. Had I imagined the entire thing? I decided to dig deeper. During lunch, I approached my colleague Sarah, who had been with the company for years. She was the unofficial office historian, always full of stories about the building and its past occupants. "Hey, Sarah," I began cautiously. "Do you know anything about an intern named Emily?" Sarah's face paled, and she glanced around before leaning in closer. "Emily? Are you serious?" I nodded, sensing that I was about to uncover something significant. "Emily Johnson," Sarah whispered. "She was an intern here about 5 years ago. She died in a car accident on her way to work. It was tragic. Everyone loved her." A chill ran down my spine. "Died? But I saw her yesterday." Sarah's eyes widened in shock. "You must be mistaken. Emily's been dead for years." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "No, I'm sure of it. She asked for help." Sarah looked genuinely concerned. "Maybe you should talk to HR. There might be something in her file." That afternoon, I made my way to the HR department, feeling a mix of fear and curiosity. I explained that I needed to look up information on a past intern for a project, and after a few minutes of searching, they handed me Emily Johnson's file. I found a quiet corner and began to read. Emily had been an exemplary intern, with glowing reviews from everyone she worked with. But there was something else, something that made my blood run cold. Her file included a note about her last days. Emily had been acting strangely, according to her supervisor. She complained of feeling watched and hearing whispers. She had even mentioned seeing a figure standing by her desk late at night. As I read these words, a sense of dread washed over me. Was Emily experiencing the same haunting presence before her death? I needed to know more. I decided to visit the accident site that evening. Maybe there was something there, some clue that could explain why Emily's spirit was haunting the office. The sun was setting as I drove to the intersection where Emily's car had crashed. It was a quiet, nondescript place, not far from the office. I parked my car and walked to the spot, feeling a strange pull guiding me. As I stood there, the air grew colder, and I felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine what Emily had felt in her last moments. A sudden gust of wind whipped around me, and I heard a faint whisper. "Help me!" My eyes snapped open, and there, in the dim light, I saw her. Emily stood by the side of the road, her eyes filled with the same sorrow and desperation I had seen in the office. She pointed towards the bushes on the side of the road, and I followed her gaze. Hidden in the underbrush, I found a small, rusted box. Inside, there were letters and photographs, memories of a life cut short. Among them was a diary, detailing Emily's growing fear of the presence she felt in the office, right up until the day she died. As I held the diary, I knew that Emily's spirit was tied to these memories. She needed closure, and I was the only one who could help her find it. I carefully collected the contents of the box and promised myself that I would uncover the truth about her death and the haunting presence that still lingered in the office. Part 3. The Office at Night. Returning to the office the next day, I felt an unsettling heaviness in the air. Emily's story weighed on me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Determined to find answers, I decided to stay late, hoping to encounter Emily again or uncover more about the entity haunting the office. The hours dragged on, the office slowly emptying as my colleagues left for the night. By 9 p.m., I was alone. The usual hum of activity was replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the building settling. I sat at my desk, Emily's diary open in front of me. Her entries were increasingly desperate, describing how she felt trapped and terrified by the presence that seemed to follow her. As I read, the temperature in the room seemed to drop, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Help me!" The whisper echoed through the office, sending a jolt of fear through me. I stood up, scanning the room, but saw nothing. Taking a deep breath, I called out, "Emily, is that you?" The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, making my way towards the source of the whisper. The air grew colder as I approached Emily's old desk, which had been left unused since her death. There, sitting on the desk, was a picture frame. It contained a photo of Emily, smiling brightly, surrounded by her friends. The glass was cracked, and the photo seemed to be faded, as if it had aged decades in just a few years. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness. My phone's flashlight flickered before going out, leaving me in pitch blackness. My heart pounded in my chest as I fumbled to turn it back on, but the battery was dead. "Help me." The whisper was louder now, closer. I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck and spun around, but saw only shadows. The fear was overwhelming, but I knew I had to stay calm. Emily needed me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small box I had found at the crash site. Holding it tightly, I whispered, "Emily, I have your memories. I'm here to help you." The darkness seemed to recede slightly, and I saw a faint, ghostly figure standing in front of me. Emily's eyes were filled with tears, her expression a mix of relief and sorrow. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I was so scared. It wouldn't leave me alone. I stepped closer, holding out the box. "Emily, what is it? What was haunting you?" Before she could answer, a cold, malevolent presence filled the room. The shadows seemed to coalesce into a dark figure, its eyes glowing with a sinister light. Emily's form flickered, and she looked at me with panic. "You have to destroy it," she cried. "It's tied to the memories. Burn them." The dark figure lunged towards us, and I felt an icy hand grip my arm. I screamed, wrenching myself free and running towards the office kitchen, where I knew there was a lighter. The figure pursued me, its whispers filling my mind with terror. I burst into the kitchen, frantically searching for the lighter. The dark figure loomed in the doorway, its eyes burning with rage. My fingers closed around the lighter, and I grabbed a paper towel, setting it alight. Holding the flame to the box, I watched as the old letters and photographs caught fire. The dark figure shrieked, its form writhing as if in agony. Emily's ghostly presence appeared beside me, her expression one of relief. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice growing faint. "You freed me." As the last of the memories turned to ash, the dark figure dissolved into nothingness. The oppressive weight lifted, and the room grew warmer. Emily's spirit began to fade, but she smiled at me one last time. "Goodbye," she said softly, "and thank you." I watched as she disappeared, leaving me alone in the now silent office. The nightmare was over, but I knew I would never forget the experience. Emily had found peace, and I had uncovered the dark secret that had haunted our workplace for years. Part 4. A Colleague's Demise. In the days following Emily's departure, the office felt lighter, almost as if a dark cloud had been lifted. People smiled more, and the usual hum of productivity returned. I was starting to believe that the nightmare was truly over. But then, something happened that made me realize the horror was far from finished. One evening, as I was leaving work, I ran into Tom, one of my colleagues. Tom was a skeptical guy, always brushing off any talk of the supernatural as nonsense. When he heard about Emily and the strange occurrences, he laughed it off and called it all an overactive imagination. "Hey, heading out?" he asked, falling into step beside me. "Yeah," I replied. "Just glad things are getting back to normal." Tom smirked. "You really believe all that ghost stuff, huh? I think you just scared yourself silly." I forced a laugh, but inside I felt a pang of unease. "Maybe. Just glad it's over." Tom shook his head. "You know, I've been working late, and I've never seen anything strange. I think you just let your imagination run wild." We parted ways in the parking lot, and I watched as Tom walked back into the building. He had a lot of work to catch up on, and it looked like he was planning another late night. As I drove away, a nagging worry tugged at the back of my mind. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the events of the past few weeks in my head, the image of Emily's pleading eyes haunting me. I told myself Tom would be fine, that nothing would happen, but deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The next morning the office was in chaos. Police cars were parked outside and a crowd had gathered, murmuring in hushed, frightened tones. My heart raced as I pushed through the throng of people, desperate to find out what had happened. "What's going on?" I asked one of my co-workers, Sarah, who stood at the edge of the crowd, her face pale. "It's Tom," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Hez dead." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What? How?" "They found him in the office this morning," Sarah said, her eyes wide with fear. He was lying at his desk, but his face, it looked like he was terrified, like he saw something awful before he died." A cold chill ran down my spine. I knew that whatever had haunted Emily wasn't gone. It was still here, and it had claimed another victim. Inside the office, the atmosphere was tense and grim. Police officers were questioning employees, and the air was thick with a sense of dread. I found myself standing near Tom's desk, looking at the spot where he had died. His computer screen was still on, displaying the last thing he had been working on. Papers were scattered across the desk, and his chair was knocked over, as if he had tried to flee. I felt a cold presence behind me and turned to see a shadow flicker in the corner of the room. My heart pounded in my chest, and I knew that whatever had killed Tom was still here, watching, waiting. Later that day, I was called into the manager's office. Mr. Andrews, our usually composed and stern boss, looked visibly shaken. "I don't know what's going on," he said, his voice unsteady, "but something's not right here. First, the rumors about Emily, and now Tom. It's too much of a coincidence." I nodded, my mind racing. "I think whatever was haunting Emily is still here, and it's dangerous." Mr. Andrews sighed, rubbing his temples. "We need to figure this out before anyone else gets hurt. But be careful. If you find anything, let me know immediately." Leaving the office, I felt a renewed sense of urgency. Tom's death had proven that the malevolent force was still active and it was willing to kill. I had to uncover the truth, not just for Emily, but to save everyone else in the office. That night, I returned to the building, determined to find the source of the haunting. Armed with a flashlight and Emily's diary, I began my search. The office was eerily quiet, the shadows seeming to shift and dance around me. I started at Emily's old desk, hoping to find some clue that I had missed before. As I rifled through her belongings, I heard a faint, familiar whisper. "Help me." My heart pounded as I turned towards the sound, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, guiding me towards the storage room at the back of the office. With every step, the air grew colder, and the whispers more desperate. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread as I approached the door. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was filled with old files and office supplies, but in the corner something caught my eye. A dusty, forgotten mirror leaned against the wall, its surface covered in grime. As I wiped away the dirt, my reflection stared back at me, but there was something else. In the dim light, I saw the faint outline of a figure standing behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. The air was freezing, my breath visible in the dark. I turned back to the mirror, and the figure was clearer now. Emily, her eyes wide with fear, pointed to something on the floor. I followed her gaze and saw a small trap door hidden beneath a pile of old boxes. My hands trembled as I cleared the debris and pried it open, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down into the depths of the building. With a final glance at Emily's reflection, I descended into the darkness, determined to confront whatever malevolent force had claimed Tom's life and was still haunting the office. Part 5. The Hidden Past. The staircase led into a basement I didn't know existed. The air was damp and musty, filled with the scent of decay. My flashlight flickered, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. The whispers grew louder, echoing off the stone walls, mingling with the sound of my own footsteps. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a small windowless room. The walls were lined with old wooden shelves cluttered with dusty files, broken office equipment, and forgotten relics of the past. In the center of the room was a large, weathered desk covered in papers and photographs. I moved closer, my heart pounding in my chest. The photographs were old, some yellowed with age. They showed the office building in various stages of construction and renovation, but it was the people in the photos that caught my attention. There was a man, tall and imposing, always standing apart from the others, his face twisted in a cruel sneer. One photograph in particular sent a chill down my spine. It was a group photo of what looked like the original construction crew, standing in front of the partially built office. Among them was the man, his hand resting on the shoulder of a young woman. She looked familiar, her eyes wide with fear. It was Emily. I rifled through the papers on the desk, searching for answers. I found an old ledger, its pages filled with meticulous notes and entries. One name appeared repeatedly: Robert Hawkins, the foreman of the construction crew. The notes spoke of strange accidents, unexplained deaths, and workers who vanished without a trace. The more I read, the clearer it became. Robert Hawkins had been a sadistic, ruthless man, ruling his workers with an iron fist, and it seemed his cruelty had extended to Emily. A final entry, written in shaky handwriting, detailed an incident that had occurred in the basement. Hawkins had discovered a worker stealing supplies. Enraged, he had locked the man in the basement, leaving him to die. The entry ended abruptly with a cryptic warning: "The evil lingers." I felt a cold presence behind me and turned to see Emily's ghostly form. She looked more solid now, her expression one of both relief and fear. "It's him," she whispered. "Hawkins. He's still here." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Hawkins' spirit had been haunting the office, tormenting Emily and anyone else who dared to uncover the truth. And now he had killed Tom. "We need to stop him," I said, my voice shaking. "How do we do it?" Emily pointed to a metal box on the shelf. Inside, I found an old rusted key. "This opens the furnace room," she said. "You need to burn his belongings. It's the only way to break his hold." With the key in hand, I made my way through the basement, following Emily's directions. The whispers grew louder, angrier, as if Hawkins knew what I was planning. The temperature dropped, and I felt his malevolent presence closing in on me. I reached the furnace room, the door creaking open to reveal a large ancient furnace. Its iron doors were covered in soot and rust, but it still radiated a faint heat. I opened the metal box and found a bundle of Hawkins' personal belongings, a pocket watch, a set of keys, and a small leather-bound journal. As I tossed the items into the furnace, the room seemed to shudder. The whispers turned into screams, filling the air with a deafening roar. Flames erupted from the furnace, consuming Hawkins' belongings. The heat was intense, and I stumbled back, shielding my face. Emily appeared beside me, her form glowing with an ethereal light. "It's almost over," she said, her voice calm. "You did it." The flames died down and the whispers ceased. The air grew warmer, and the oppressive weight lifted. Hawkins' spirit was finally gone, and the office was free from his malevolent grip. But as the relief washed over me, I heard a faint sound like a distant echo. It was Tom's voice, calling out for help. My heart sank. I had been so focused on Hawkins that I had forgotten about Tom. I turned to Emily, panic in my eyes. "Tom," I said, "is he—" Emily's expression was somber. "I'm sorry. Hawkins' grip on him was too strong. There's nothing we can do." Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized the full extent of the tragedy. Tom was gone, another victim of Hawkins' cruelty. I had avenged him, but it was a hollow victory. Emily placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Thank you for freeing me," she said, "and for ending this nightmare. But now, it's time for me to move on." I watched as her form grew fainter, dissolving into the air. "Goodbye, Emily," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. "Rest in peace." As Emily's spirit faded, I felt a sense of closure. The office was finally free from its dark past, but the memory of Tom and Emily would stay with me forever. I made my way back up the stairs, leaving the basement behind. The office was quiet now, the air clear and still. I knew that the events of the past few weeks would haunt me for the rest of my life, but I also knew that I had done the right thing. I had freed Emily and ended Hawkins' reign of terror, and in doing so, I had ensured that no one else would suffer the same fate. Part 6. A New Beginning. The days following Tom's death and the final confrontation with Hawkins were a blur. The office was closed for an investigation, but no one could explain the supernatural events that had transpired. The official report listed Tom's death as a tragic accident, but those of us who knew the truth understood the price of the haunted past. Returning to work after the investigation was difficult. The once lively atmosphere had changed, the shadows of recent events lingering like a dark fog. My colleagues were quieter, their eyes avoiding the area where Tom's desk had once been. The empty desk served as a constant reminder of what we had endured. Determined to honor Tom and Emily, I dedicated myself to uncovering more about the office's history. I spent my evenings combing through old records, hoping to find any trace of other victims who might have suffered at Hawkins' hands. As I delved deeper into the archives, I discovered that our building had a long history of unexplained incidents, all pointing back to the same dark force. One night, while sifting through dusty files, I came across a journal belonging to one of the original construction workers. The entries detailed strange occurrences and the pervasive fear that haunted the crew. The final entry confirmed what I had suspected. Hawkins' malevolent influence had begun long before the building was even completed. I knew I needed to share my findings with Mr. Andrews. He had been supportive throughout the ordeal and deserved to know the full story. The next morning I approached him, carrying the journal and other documents I had uncovered. "Mr. Andrews, I think you should see this," I said, placing the journal on his desk. He looked up from his computer, his eyes tired but attentive. As he read through the entries, his expression grew increasingly grave. "This confirms everything we've feared," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "Hawkins' spirit has been a blight on this place for decades. We need to make this right," I replied. "We can't let his legacy of fear continue." Mr. Andrews nodded. "Agreed. We'll need to cleanse the building, both spiritually and physically. We'll bring in experts and do everything we can to ensure this never happens again." The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Paranormal experts were brought in to cleanse the building, performing rituals and blessings to banish any lingering spirits. Construction crews renovated the basement, transforming the dark, foreboding space into a bright and functional area. The old furnace was removed, and Hawkins' personal items were taken away to be properly disposed of. Throughout the process, I felt a growing sense of hope. The darkness that had once gripped our office was finally lifting, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and unity. My colleagues and I came together, determined to create a safe and welcoming environment for everyone. As the renovations were completed, we held a memorial for Tom and Emily. It was a somber occasion, but also a chance for us to heal and move forward. We shared stories, lit candles, and planted a tree in their memory outside the building. The tree symbolized a new beginning, a living tribute to those we had lost. In the months that followed, the office flourished. Productivity increased, and the on-STEM atmosphere was now filled with light and positivity. The fear and anxiety that had plagued us were replaced with a sense of community and support. One afternoon, as I was wrapping up my work, I felt a gentle breeze brush past me. I looked up and saw the tree outside, its leaves rustling in the wind. For a moment I thought I saw Emily's smiling face among the branches, a reminder that her spirit had finally found peace. I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. The nightmare was over, and we had emerged stronger and more resilient. The office was no longer a place of fear, but a place of hope and renewal. As I packed my things to leave for the day, I glanced at Tom's old desk, now occupied by a new intern. She was bright and eager, her laughter echoing through the room. It was a sound I hadn't heard in a long time, and it filled me with a sense of fulfillment. We had faced the darkness and come out the other side. Emily and Tom's spirits would always be a part of us, their memories a reminder of the strength we found in each other. The ghostly intern had finally moved on, and so had we. As I walked out of the office that evening, the sun setting behind me, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The past had been laid to rest and a new chapter had begun. And in that moment, I knew that we were finally free.